Hello, my name is John Lewis Taylor, and I live here in Gallup, and I'm the author of two books. The first one was called Looking for Dan, which is about Dan Du Bois, who was a rather interesting character here in Gallup and over in Arizona in the late 19th, early 20th century. And my latest book is called Navajo Scouts During the Apache Wars, which is a history of the Navajo Scouts, which goes in the Apache War period and on up until the early 20th century. And I worked with the Arcadia Publishing Company, the History Press division, in developing this book. I sent in a prospectus to them. They liked it. They wanted it for their military history, and we went from there. Now, one of the most interesting things to me in telling this story was the requirement of having 65 to 85 images. I ended up with 73 images in my book. Before I began this, I was not very well acquainted with photo or digital archives. During the process, I became very well acquainted. When I first started, I wasn't sure what to do, and I got some help from the publisher. And one day I was watching public television, and a credit went to the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. So I emailed them, and their director, Paul Garsmer, sent me back a nice email that said, we don't have what you're interested in, but here are about 24 sources that have it. So I went from there, and sure enough, most of those sources turned out to be very helpful. I did notice that the photographic image folks that work with that archivist are extremely helpful. They talk to you on the phone, they send your emails, but I also noticed that it's not cheap. So if you get into this business and want images for your book, and the history press particularly, you've got to respect the copyright laws. So the average cost of an image to put in a book and get the copyright permissions is about $50. So I had to sell a lot of books to break even on the images. Let's put it that way. Okay. The first thing I had to work with was the cover. And the History Press has a designer that works with you. They give you a little, they send you online a little book, tells you about how they do the cover and what you're interested in, and the importance of the cover selling the book, because their major goal is for you to sell a lot of books, which helps them to take care of the cost of publishing. Okay, so they gave me, the publisher gave me some ideas as to the design. I really didn't like it. I wanted the image to reflect the aim of the book, which is a discussion of the relationship between the Navajo and the American military and the beginning of that relationship, which continues today. So I was fortunate to find in the New Mexico archives, the Palace of the Governor photo archives, this image that you see of a Captain Benjamin Rogers and Navajo Scout Largo, who was a chief of scouts or a first sergeant of scouts at Fort Wingate. Captain Rogers was an officer in the 13th Infantry stationed at Fort Wingate, which was a Buffalo Soldiers unit, and Ben Wittick took the picture. Now for color, I wanted to use what I call the Navajo directional colors, and they are black, white, blue, and yellow for each direction. Since scouts are directing, and I wanted to have a very Navajo feel. So if you'll look, you see the publisher agreed, and the cover has the 4 colors. And I don't know how many people noticed that, but I insisted on that, and I insisted on those pictures. On the back cover, you'll see it's a picture of the old Navajo Scouts at Crown Point at the agency there, with Agent Stacker and a man by the name of Franklin, who was from the pension office in Denver, who certified the Scouts' pensions. And one of the most interesting parts of the book to me to research was how the Scouts in the 1920s received their military pensions. And I do want to thank Daniel Koshark, who is the man in charge of the Palace of the Governor Digital Archives, who helped me find that photograph. Information I got from the military archive, I began my research. I began contacting archives. This picture is the 6th Cavalry Band at Fort Wingate in 1886. If you look at the slide, you'll see houses behind the musicians there, and those are the officers' row, which if you go to Wingate Elementary, the old elementary school today, it's where the dormitories are, the 8-shaped dorms. In back you'll see the ridge line, and where they're standing is the parade grounds, which eventually evolved into the playgrounds of the old Wingate Elementary School. I think that's where a little softball field was. Okay, I got this image from Benecke Library at Yale University. I tracked it down to there. That was sort of fun because they required me, in order to use the library there, to be registered at Yale. So I had to get an ID as an independent scholar at Yale. So I can say I've been an Ivy League person here. The photo was taken by a Captain John Lauderdale, and he was a doctor in the military, Civil War veteran, and he also had a hobby of taking pictures. One of the things that was exciting for me, it's not reflected in the book except for the credits, is learning about these photographers of this period. Okay, next slide. Okay. This image also comes from the Benecke Library at Yale. The photographer was a man named Christian Bartholomeus, who was a German immigrant who enlisted in the Army. He served in the Army from 1870 to 1903, and he was also a photographer. I don't know if he was, part of his duties as a soldier was to take pictures, but he took them in every place he was stationed. This picture shows a Captain Allen and Navajo Scouts at Fort Wingate. It's a great image because it shows Scouts. I wanted a picture of Navajo Scouts in uniform, and you see 2 of them there are wearing the military blouse. They're all carrying the weapon of the time that they were issued, the carbine, Sharp's carbine. The horse has an officer's saddle. You see the Chaha'o in the background, the ridge by Wingate, and the what's that called? Wedge tent. That fit it perfectly with what I wanted. Next slide. Okay, this is the picture that's on the back cover. This picture came from the National Archaeological Archives in Washington, D.C., and I worked with a person named Catherine Crow. She was very helpful. We tracked this picture down. I don't know if it had been published before. One of the things I did was I looked at every book I could find in our beloved Octavia Pallin library here and other sources, and saw where images that might fit came from. This is Agent Stacker, who is the man with in the middle, the two belaganas in the middle there. The one holding a hat is Stacker, and the other one also holding a hat, but his has less hair. That is Franklin, who was a pension officer, and the rest are the Scouts. They gathered there at the agency at Crown Point to receive their medals. Stacker really promoted the Scouts, and he took them to the 1925 and 1926 ceremonial where they were honored. And I think it was at the 26th ceremonial that someone came out from the then called the War Department and gave them their medals. Okay, this picture is from 1906. I wanted to show Scouts in uniforms of the a later period because they go on up until the 20th century. This was taken by Simon Schwarnberger, who was a brother at St. Michael's. He left the order and opened a photography shop in Gallup. Navajos called him Big Eyes. And one thing I thought was interesting about him is that he started a business in Gallup. I don't know how successful it was. It was called Talawush, and it was to make soap out of yucca. Okay, and the scout, one of the scouts, the taller one on the right is probably Jeff King, who's a well-known scout, and this picture was taken at Wingate. And you notice that King is wearing moccasins. Okay, this is an image of Fort Wingate as it looked in 1873. None of these buildings still exist. 1873 is the year that the Scouts were formed at Fort Wingate, when the first unit of Scouts was recruited, 25 Scouts to a company. I like this picture because it shows soldiers, it shows some caissons. I feel that it must have been taken in the spring because if you can see the smoke in the chimneys, it's practically horizontal, sort of like today. And you can see the ridge back of Fort Wingate. And it was taken by a photographer of interest named Timothy O'Sullivan. He was from Ireland. He served in the Civil War. And during the war, he was assigned to Matthew Brady to take battlefield pictures. After the war, he was out of the Army. He came west, and he went around and took as many pictures of different things in the West as he could because there was a big market for it. And this picture came from the National Archives and Records, Washington, D.C. About cost, National Archives and the Library of Congress, their pictures are free. You can use them. You have to get permission, but there's no charge. Okay. This is a famous picture taken by Ben Wittick. Ben Wittick was a photographer here in Gallup and at Fort Wingate. He had a studio in both places. This came from Wikimedia Commons, and Wikimedia Commons is a site online. You can download the images. There's no charge. All of them, the copyrights have expired. Wittick is famous for his picture of Geronimo, which is in posters, etc., and his picture of Billy the Kid. And there's an excellent book about him in our library here by Patricia Border called Shadows in Glass. This image is one from the archives in Santa Fe, Palace of the Governor. It's one that I spent a lot of time looking for because the Belagana there, the soldier, is Captain Henry H. Wright, who commanded Navajo, served with Navajo Scouts in most of their campaigns. And with him are several Navajos. possibly Scouts. There's a woman in the picture, which I find real interesting in her outfit. On her moccasin there looks like a piece of white shell, but I'm not sure what it is. And if you blow this up, you will notice that she has one toe sticking out of her moccasin on her right moccasin. The Navajo man with the hat, he appears in several images. What's interesting about this to me, it was taken by Henry Heister, who was, again, a photographer who served in the Civil War. He was a civilian. He came west. This is what they call a stereoscope, and there was a great market for these because what would happen is they would be sold, and there was a device called a stereo optic, which you put it in that device. In Victorian times, you got a 3D image. And this picture was taken about 1878 at Fort Defiance. Okay, next image. This one is John Daw, an image of John Daw. I looked for him. I found this image in an issue of the Arizona Highways back in 1973, the date of the magazine, and it was called him Big Policeman. After he was a scout, he became a policeman. There was an article about him in the Navajo Times as being the last scout. He died in the 1960s. That picture was taken with his granddaughter Louise, and it was probably taken in Tuba City. I'm not really sure what was taken. It comes from the Klein Library in northern Arizona University, and I worked with an archivist there named Cynthia Summers. It's a great picture. And you see he's wearing his badge because he was a policeman. And in one of Zane Grey's books, I think it's called Rainbow Bridge, or the Rainbow Trail, he is a fictionalized character in the book. He was quite a guy. He was the last scout, the last surviving one. Okay. This picture I really like because this was a reunion of scouts at Fort Wingate, probably in the about 1910, maybe the 1920s. It shows General Hugh L. Scott, who was commanded several campaigns with Navajo Scouts. He later became what we would now call head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I forgot the title at that time. And he was also commandant at West Point, and he wrote a book about Indian Sign Language. Plains Indian Sign Language is still used. He came out to meet with scouts. Let's see. There's 3 women in the picture. When I first got this image, I did not think that, I figured they were wives or mothers or girlfriends or sisters or whatever. But I later discovered and put in the book that someone in Albuquerque, a man named David Sidabaka, had discovered that there were at least 2 Navajo women who were scouts. So maybe those 3 were old scouts. I'm not sure, but it's a great picture. And it came from the G.E.E. Lindquist collection at the Burke Library at Columbia University. And next one. This picture is from the National Anthropological Archives, and it's called a New Mexico family, and it comes from a collection by James E. Taylor, no relative that I know of, and it's from what he called the American Scrapbook of the West. And he was an interesting man. He was an illustrator. He served 1 enlistment during the Civil War, got out, and then was a battlefield illustrator for Leslie's Illustrated Weekly. So he drew pictures of Civil War actions. After the Civil War, he came west working for Leslie's magazine. He went to Zuni, other places, wrote stories and illustrated them. Now, there's a little story about this. I found it in a book called The Navajo Treaty by Bernard Michaels, and it was referenced to the National Archives. I sent them an email and with the number and of the photograph. They said, "We don't have it." I said, "Yes, you do, because it's in this book." They sent me an email, said, "Send me a copy." So I copied the picture in the book, scanned it, sent it to them, and they said, "Oh yes, we've got it. It had been misfiled." So this was the interchange I had with those. But it's a great picture. I don't really know who the photographer was. It could have been Taylor himself. I believe it was taken at Cubero, probably in about 1886, during the period of the Geronimo campaign. See the one, a picture of Nuevo Mexicanos. Okay. Now that's me, and that's the picture. They wanted a picture of the author in the book, and John Van Lant, a local photographer, took that. He has since moved to Michigan, still a great photographer, and it has the red rocks in the background. Next. You can also get images from your own collection. Part of the book talks about the founding of the Navajo Police at Fort Wingate in 1872 with Manuelito and General O.O. Howard. And so I talk a little bit about the Navajo Police. This picture is from my collection, belongs to my wife, Betty Taylor, and it's Navajo Police in the 1930s. The man in the very middle of the picture with the black hat and the black sweater is her father, who was a Navajo policeman in that period. That picture was taken at Window Rock. Also, you can enlist relatives to help you get pictures. This is the tombstone of Navajo Scout Jose Chavez, who probably was the longest serving scout. He had 15 enlistments. He was cited for bravery 2 times, one in a skirmish with Apaches in the Florida mountains, and another one by Ojo Caliente. He died at Fort Wingate from disease as a soldier in the 1890s. He was first buried at Fort Wingate when they closed the post there, and they removed the bodies to the Santa Fe National Cemetery. And my sister was going there on Memorial Day because my father is buried there. I said, "I found where his grave is, so go take a picture of it." So that's it. And she worked for free. Okay. This is another picture I wanted to use to show how what the Scouts did after their enlistment. This is Charlie Mitchell from Crown Point. He was a Scout, and he's very distinguished man, and he's wearing a badge because he was a policeman at that time when the picture was taken in the 1920s. It belongs to a collection at the Navajo Museum in Window Rock. I work there with Manuelito Wheeler, Clorinda Begay, and Ben Sorrell. They helped me get this together. I didn't know that this existed. There's a collection of maybe 50 photographs. They were taken by Samuel Stacker, the agent at Crown Point, and he used them to go with the applications for the Scouts for pensions. Now, I talked to Martin Link, and he told me that when he was museum director, there was a lot of information on the Scouts. The museum had since moved, and it's been a long time since he was director. But Clara Kelly said, there is a file, a collection of old Scout photos. And I contacted the museum. They looked for them, they found them, they knew where they were, and I was given permission to go through them, and I selected some for images. So again, it's a detective. If you're putting images in your book, it's detective work. Okay, next one. Okay, this is Old Scout Tom Torlino. And again, this is from the collection of pictures at the Navajo Museum in Window Rock. It's in the Old Scout album or file, and Stacker was the photographer. Now, who was Tom Torlino? Okay, this picture is Tom Torlino as a young man. It is every book you find on Indian education will have this picture. This is the before and after picture at Carlisle, Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Tom went there. The photograph was taken when he arrived, probably dressed him up a little bit, and then the photograph when he left, the before and after. This was standard at Carlisle. The photographer was John M. Choate, C-H-O-A-T-E, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. He was a Civil War veteran, took military pictures during the Civil War. After the Civil War, he opened a photography shop in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and he was contracted to take images at Carlisle. And there's lots of pictures on archives about Carlisle. Now, Carlisle had what was called the outing system, in which students went to businesses and farms in the towns to work and learn productive skills. John Choate had several students who helped him in photography. One was named John Leslie, who was a Puyallup Nation member from Washington State. After he left Carlisle, he returned to Tacoma, Washington, and opened a photography shop, probably one of the first Native Americans to be a photographer. He published a book of his photographs and had an exhibit at the 1895 Atlanta International Exhibition. This image, I wanted a picture, again, I was looking for a picture of a scout in uniform, and I found this one after I found Captain Allen picture. This I got from the Hayden Liboreal collection at Arizona State University at Tempe. And I sent them an email and said, do you have anything on Navajo Scouts? And they said, we have one image that's labeled Navajo Scout and Family. Do you want to see it? I said, yes. So they sent it to me. And they send you in, they send it to you in thumbnail print, and it looked good, so I got it. It was first published, I found out researching with him, in a book called Picturesque Arizona in 1878. And my book is probably the first time it's been reproduced. That is my adventures in finding images to support my story in my book, Navajo Scouts During the Apache Wars.